All right, there we go. All right, good morning, everybody. I am here for World Affairs Unfiltered, and all right, there we go. I am. This is what Tuesday morning, the 10th day of February 2026. I'm sorry for my absence yesterday. I got back really late on Sunday night. I was teaching what I do in my clinic. I was teaching it in Phoenix to a bunch of doctors that want to become board certified in this technique. As I'm the only one in Utah who is board certified. And I didn't realize that, from time to time there's connection problems with the station. And I just figured I could pick right back up yesterday morning where I left off last Tuesday. And I was wrong. Okay. So, and I had been listening to Gail Rosika's coverage of the state legislature prior to when I was supposed to go on the air. And I thought, what she was doing such a good job. I just thought, let's go ahead and play that during my hour. But I'm here now, and it's time for some update. I've been asked again several times, why aren't you talking more about domestic stuff? Because there's plenty of people who talk about domestic stuff. I listen to some of the other shows at K-Talk, and I try to offer something that is not being discussed in the sense of various philosophical ideas that definitely affect the future of this world in the light of world events. It's not just enough to talk about world events or the world picture. It's necessary to understand the various philosophies that are behind it, where they're coming from and who's really in charge and what's going on. And that's my ballywick, as they say. So here we are, almost, a few more days will be the middle of February already. And the world picture, boy, is just one of complete disarray, isn't it? I would dare to put forward the hypothesis that it's not only the United States which is in a pre-revolutionary situation, as Chaz Freeman said back on the 12th of January, but it's actually the whole world that is on the verge of revolution. And what one might expect as these dynamics play themselves out is more and more internal revelations as to what has been going on behind the scenes has been kept from our attention for so long. Like the tip of the iceberg of this destabilization of the planet, following the Epstein revelations, because they pertain to an unbelievable level of moral decay and corruption of the Western system, especially among the Western elites. It is now becoming clear, with the release of 3.5 million documents and another 3.5 million not even published, that it has involved an enormous amount of people in leading positions, and those who are not involved, who aren't listed or named, but knew about it. And no criminal investigation initiated anywhere. And they were just as complicit, even though their names aren't on the list. They knew of the list, they knew it existed, they knew what was going on, and said nothing. And I think this has the effect of the normal population, that the fearful paralysis, which many people had during the last period, is finally now erupting. I mean, these dramatic major changes are taking place, which on the one side mean the situation is extremely dangerous because these people are fearing for their entire lives, their privileges, everything that goes along with being part of the Western elites. And since the military side and the moral side are very closely connected in this revelation, I think we should be on the highest guard, because quite often A good way to take your attention off of what they don't want your attention on is a sudden war. But then on the other side, I think these tectonic changes taking place, that in the midst of all this, it can't be excluded that this present phase of history is going to be passed very soon, and a whole new phase is going to begin. Because if you look at the internet right now, you find dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of videos in which all kinds of people are reporting this and things that they personally knew about. But in any case, I think this is an avalanche which is unstoppable, because it has now created its own dynamic of complete destruction of the entire system. Just to quote one of the many commentators as to what's going on, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov said here just the other day that the decadent lifestyle of the Epstein circle shows a moral decay of the Western elites of unbelievable dimensions. And this shows the true face of the West and what the deep state is all about. And he said this is discovering the deep alliances which are ruling the entire West and who would like to dominate the whole world. And every normal human, and he said that every normal human being knows that this is pure Satanism. And I think this is absolutely on the mark, and it brings to mind something that I remember LaRouche saying on my show when he was still alive, when I interviewed him, that all his enemies were evil. I mean, that's probably the understatement of the year. And there are now many aspects to this, because the rumor flying around is that Epstein may not be dead at all. And being a naturally suspicious person, I think I'm moving into that camp. I was explaining my viewpoint on this to someone very near and dear to me yesterday. I said that, put yourself in Epstein's position for a minute, where you are an agent of the Mossad, and what you're doing isn't creating an environment or a super amusement park for the pedophilia insane people. What you're doing is collecting a network of intelligence gathering and putting people in compromising positions so that they are now under your control and to carry out your will. And because you are working with the Mossad, you are working for the best interests of Israel, so that you end up having an Israel first attitude in this country. America second, Israel first. And you have not only copied all of these files once, you've copied them multiple times. That just like the dead man's hand defensive system for nuclear retaliation from Russia to the rest of the world in the event of nuclear war, you have your own war, where all this information is kept in certain situations, where upon your confirmed death, all this stuff is released, unredacted, throughout the whole planet. I think that's pretty good life insurance. That would keep you alive. And then when you start looking at all of the little sequences of events that occurred in the prison or the jail there in New York, the recording going out at the same time, people are taking breaks, and yeah, it's just ridiculous. And then all of a sudden, with no filming of it at all, Epstein kills himself. How stupid do they think we are? But one employee of the prison reported anonymously that Epstein would have been brought out in a wheelchair into a transport van the same night he was supposed to have died. So we kind of look to see whether there's any substance to that or not. But in any case, the effects of this is what I wanted to bring attention to, because they're everywhere. I think one of the most prominent places is British Prime Minister Keir Starmer's office, because he sacrificed not only his chief of staff, Morgan McSweeney, but also within hours of McSweeney's resignation, Tim Allen, director of communications, resigned. This is the second top cabinet member to resign in 24 hours. No, I don't have anything about Tim Allen, but in any case, Sweeney resigned because he took responsibility for having appointed Peter Mandelson to be the British ambassador to the U.S. And then Mandelson, of course, was the British ambassador who resigned after he said they flood the zone around Trump to make sure that his entire daily agenda is completely controlled, who he sees and who he talks to. Imagine that. The ambassador of a foreign country admitting publicly that they cram the executive office of the country you are now an ambassador to with all kinds of distracting moments and information and manipulative control so that that executive head hasn't a second to sit still and think about what's really going on. And then there's other reports that he is completely controlled. That Trump, his daily agenda is designed to completely control him, who he sees and who he talks to. And then there's many other reports, especially some gruesome details coming out about what happened on this private island of Epstein in the Caribbean, where supposedly blood transfusions took place. Some of these rich oligarchs wanted the blood of the younger people. The question of what happened to these younger people, it's not funny, remains unknown. Maria Zakharova said that has been known for a long time. Excuse me, these people filled their bellies with human flesh, which was a strange remark at the time she did it a few days ago. But there are now reports that they even ate people. There's one video in which someone from a religious background claims that in the Philippines, even babies in these circles. It's difficult to verify all of this, but a lot of things are flying around, like what's just been happening in the Norwegian royal house, what's happened with Jack Long, the former cultural minister in France. And, you know, this you have to look at this stuff in great detail because it's identical with the war-maddening, mongering crowd. And then another thing, I think, which is quite significant, is that over the weekend, Iranian Foreign Minister Grachi went to Qatar, and this was not in the news. No Western media covered this, but this is really significant in the sense of the growing power against Israel in the Middle East. Grachi went to Qatar. He addressed the Al Jazeera Forum that had 400 international participants. And this is very significant, as I said, because not one word about that was mentioned in Western media. So the Europeans and the Americans know nothing about this. Grachi gave a major speech, and there was a de facto unification, get this, between the Shiite and the Sunni Muslims against Israel and the genocide in Gaza. Now, as you well know, the Shiite and the Sunni have been killing each other for a long, long time. And they finally sat there in this meeting and unified in their efforts against Israel and the genocide in Gaza. But if that alliance holds, which is rather tenuous, because they both see each other as the apostate, it explains why all the neighbors of Iran and Israel have appealed to not back up a new strike against Iran, which we're kind of waiting for to see what happens with that. But in any case, the speech that Grachi made is quite amazing. He said the fact that Israel remained without any legal correction or punishment for what they have done has severely damaged the system of international law, and he said that international law is no longer a factor. President Trump's pretty well established that himself. But he says a dangerous precedent's been created because if a state with enough political backing can bombard their own civilians, starve an entire people in their midst to death, destroy medical infrastructure, murder people with impunity, and get support from the West to do it, then that means that people should draw the conclusion that you are not being called to account for what you're doing, and so therefore everybody can do whatever they damn well please. And also the fact that Israel's proceeding with Eretz Israel and is increasing its weapon arsenal with no limitations. So Grachi again mentioned that the case of Palestine is not just a question of solidarity. It is the irreplaceable basic foundation of regional security. And I think that's very significant because there were these discussions in Abu Dhabi over the weekend, which were said to be productive, but I think the appearance of Agrachi in front of this Al Jazeera forum is actually extremely important, and that the Sunni and the Shia sat there together. Now, the negotiations in Abu Dhabi on the Ukraine, with Russian, Ukrainian, American participation, Kushner, Witkoff, Dmitriev, but they didn't say a whole lot about it. They only said that there was progress, but no obstacles have been removed. Supposedly, there's been renewal of communications about the military of Russia and the Ukraine, and the territorial disputes have not yet settled, and that's that. But we do know from information coming from the Russian Foreign Ministry that their continued bombardment against information and energy communication centers in Ukraine will continue. On the European attitude towards the Ukraine, there's also some motion. Macron, interestingly enough, sent a representative to talk to Putin and Yushakov. The German media, again, did not report that that meeting ever took place, but it clearly shows that there is this growing split in the EU because Merz is still refusing any direct contact with Moscow. And then one day after Macron's representative was in Moscow, the Swiss foreign minister, also in Moscow, together with the Secretary General from Turkey, were all seen laying flowers at the tomb of the unknown soldier near the Kremlin. What does that tell you? I think it's clear that somehow the Ukraine conflict is moving towards its end, and the main aim to ruin Russia has not been accomplished. But some countries like Germany with Merz are unfortunately with the still wrapped up in the motivation of confrontation. But I got off on I got out in the weeds there for a second about Ukraine. I want to keep talking about the Middle East for a moment because Israel has forbidden, and I thought it was just rumor at first. Israel has absolutely forbidden. And don't just hear this. I want you to think about this. I want this to sit there in your head. Israel has forbidden Doctors Without Borders and 36 other organizations access to Gaza, which has devastating consequences because there's at least, latest count, 18,500 people who are categorized as severely ill, who are now without any medical treatment or medicine. So all you Israel First people, or those of you who know Israel First, America Second people, how do you explain this? So clearly these people who are without any medicine or medical treatment. So the genocide clearly continues. And also, again, Merz is stonewalling on talking to Moscow, sticking to his evil outlook on the Middle East. And when he was recently in India, he said publicly that he's convinced that the world is now seeing the last days of the Iranian regime. Now, I'm of the opinion, despite what U.S. Treasury Secretary Bessent testified the other day in front of the U.S. Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. I mean, he admitted that it was the United States on national television in front of the committee, that it was the United States which pushed Iran into this action by saying that the U.S. consciously created a dollar shortage in December in order to trigger the protests in Iran. And he said, what we can do at that treasury, and what we have done, is create a dollar shortage in Iran. And then at a speech at the Economics Club in New York in March, He said he outlined the strategy. This is like a year ago. He said it came to a swift, he said, I'm quoting, I would say grand culmination in December when the largest banks in Iran went under. There was a run on the bank. The central bank had to print money. The Iranian currency went into free fall. Inflation exploded. And hence we have seen the Iranian people out on the streets. And he also said it was Washington which simultaneously pushed Iran's oil exports down to zero, compounding economic pressure on the country and deepening the impact on ordinary Iranians. And then he said this is economic statecraft because no shots were fired. Just underscoring the deliberate use of financial warfare as a tool of U.S. foreign policy. Now that needs to be published widely, like Pompeo here not long ago, saying that every demonstrator had a Mossad agent at their side in the big demonstration here several weeks ago in Tehran and elsewhere in Iran. Had a Mossad agent on its side. So the revelation, and then the revelations about the foreign delivery of the Starlight devices, because the Western narrative is so absolutely still saying the Iranians butchered 50,000 people. Blah, blah, blah. And these Western journalists who are repeating this line are consciously lying because now even Besant is admitting to this, that there are many other reports which I mentioned. It is so unbelievable that they're doing this right out in the open. So I think we have to make sure that this narrative is not going to be believed, because as long as this narrative exists, it's going to be the pretext for a second strike against Iran, which could send the world into a very quick escalation to World War III, because both Russia and China have essentially said they're not going to allow this attack to take place and sit by. What does that mean? Now, there's a lot of recognition that the world is changing in a very breathtaking way. Of the many articles, there's one I want to quote, comes from Ralph Bouchard, who participated in several events, including several events in January. He has a very big article, very well researched, on the Swiss website Global Bridge. And it's in English with the title, In Search of an End of the Global Interregnum, where he basically says we experience right now how the West is hanging on in a very desperate way to the idea of a Western-dominated world order, but the West has completely lost any of its credibility. And after 1 year of the Trump administration, we see that the U.S. has absolutely not moved away from unilateralism, and so forth and so on. And then he goes through many aspects, including the need for reform of the United Nations. And I'm only mentioning to say that in more legitimate Western media, Global Bridge is an alternative media, but it's not extreme. So I think some of the analysis that comes out of Global Bridge ought to be considered. Now, part of this gigantic, tremendous shift going on is the fact that there are now even not so great countries, not so great, big, powerful countries turning to China. And therefore, the whole idea to isolate China, to decouple, to de-risk any further underscoring of, or substantiation of China's movement forward as a world power is no longer there. Global Times has this article commenting on the wave of high-profile visits of world leaders. At least 5 world leaders have visited Beijing in January alone. And they mention Keir Starmer, Mark Carney. It's just, their little world's falling apart. And they know what's coming. and they don't want to, Canada does not want to become the 51st state. At my conference this last weekend, seminar, uh, a very good friend of mine who I was in school with was there wanting to finish his board certification process. And he's from Canada. He's from southern Canada, in southern BC. And he says, Jack, we're all just lining up to be the 51st state. He said, we essentially are now. And I said, well, how would you feel about that? You're born and raised Canadian. And he said, he says, Jack, you lived in Canada for 2 years. You know how Americanized Canada is. And he said, that's back in the late 60s, early 70s. It's even more Americanized now than ever before. And of course, there are Canadian nationalists who won't have anything to do with it. And there's a good portion of the Canadian population that are pure British files and would fight to the end. But he said it's coming, and it's going to happen economically. And we're not going to have any choice. And the economic border between your country, the US, and our country, Canada, is going to completely disappear. Free and open travel across the border. More and more integration of American industry and business into the Canadian setting. Until one day, Canadians are going to wake up and see the red, white, and blue flying over their federal offices. I'd never heard anything like that before. But the point I want to make is Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, has been seen meeting with Xi Jinping and Chinese economic leaders because they're desperate. Their Western world's falling apart. The European Union is falling apart. NATO is falling apart. And they've got to forget the U.S. sanctions that are being placed on countries that want to do business with China or want to do business with Russia. So they're going behind the scenes because that's the only way they're going to survive financially. I think even Latin America is not sticking to the Western Hemisphere doctrines. The new big one, the national security strategy. There's another article in Global Times where they said a quiet but profound shift is reshaping the geopolitical map of South America, referring to this exclusive reporter's report saying Brazil is signals new openness to Mercosur China talks, and that there's this major shift for Latin America's largest economy, but it also involves other countries, like the Mercosur members, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, Bolivia, Venezuela. In any case, they say that the pressure by Washington is just not that effective in Latin America. Now, obviously, one of the reasons is the way the U.S. is treating Cuba, where the complete boycott and sanctions and actual cordoning is creating a complete boycott, which is causing a situation basically in the direction of the Gaza treatment. The United States is turning Cuba into a Gaza. And there are now reports from the Tagesspiegel in Germany that a woman named Yadira Serrano said from Cuba, quoted in this German press because the Western press won't cover it. We are starving. Many people are malnourished and emaciated. They look as if they're suffering from an incurable disease, but they suffer from extreme poverty. So last week, President Trump names the Cuban regime as an extraordinary threat for national security of the United States and threatened all countries that deliver oil to Cuba with massive tariffs. So that's the situation in Cuba. Last week, President Trump names the Cuban regime as an extraordinary threat for national security of the United States. Now, I want you to use every last portion of your conscious and unconscious mind to come up with a definable support, reason, explanation logic as to how Cuba can be an extraordinary threat for American national security. And then Africa, the U.S. effort to retake control of Africa in some form is not being too welcomed. There was this interview with the new head of the State Department Bureau of African Affairs, Nick Checker, who discussed the so-called new approach to Africa. He said that they're gearing up to compete with China to dislodge it from certain priority areas. I don't think that's going to work very well. So remember, oh gosh, was it the president? It wasn't Nigeria. And I've quoted it several times, now I can't remember it, where they had this, the annual huge African summit. And they were asked, why are you doing so much business with China? And he said, China's building our highways. They're building nuclear power plants. They're building waterways. They're building reservoirs. They're building locks in the rivers. They're building hospitals. They're building airports. What we get from the Americans are vaccines. Man, I can't get that out of my head. And so with Nick Checker, the new head of the State Department's Bureau of African Affairs, says we're going to try to dislodge China from critical priority areas with vaccines. I don't think that's going to work. I don't think that's going to work very well. And then in Europe, one can only say that things are heading towards a tipping point because the entire European Union, factories are closing or are reducing their production significantly. Chemical factories, steel production, fertilizer, all intensive energy economic branches are either moving their production out of the country to somewhere else, or if they can't afford to do that, they are completely closing down. I mean, it's a complete takedown of basic industry. And the only result of that could be a complete explosion, because this takes away the livelihood of millions of people while they're putting the enormous sums in Germany in particular into armament. And the only way they can fund that is to drastically cut the money that goes to social welfare, and cutting support for migrants, cutting support for pensions, for healthcare, for schools, for education. It is just complete barbarism what's going on in Germany. And I think that the consequence is going to be that they're going to try to ban the AfD, the alternate for Deutschland, the Trump party. That's probably not fair. The right wing German Patriot Party that almost won the last election, which is going to rise. Probably other parties opposing this are going to rise as well. But the absolute inability to get a sense of the impact was clearly visible in things that are moving through Germany right now. And as I always say, I always pick Germany because Germany has always been the productivity, engineering, technology center of Europe. And those things are collapsing. And if they collapse, the rest of Europe is going to go with it. And now one of the outrageous things that the German middle level industry has written a letter to Merz where they say that the initial hope they had for the change in government with Merz, now 1 year with him being in office, what has replaced that hope is now naked horror about the Merz economic policy, and that they report that 79% of the middle-level industrial leaders do not think that this coalition is going to get any improvement from the economy. That's essentially 80%, 4/5. This shows you that there is no support in Germany now for the Merz government. So I think the picture that you see here, and I could say from discussions, emails, texts that I've had with friends, that there's a very explosive mood, just as there is here in this country, but maybe more so in Europe, because they're in the backyard of Russia, of this consequential, revolutionary momentum that's developing. And there's just an explosive mood in the population because people are realizing, more so than in this country, that the rug is being pulled out from underneath them. And so these people are in a state of shock, and they are, what do you do when you have a population in a state of shock? Well, this is when dictators come to power overnight. And now, with the end of the New START treaty, is another element of this shock. There was a very excellent interview that Diane Sayre, a candidate for president, had with Tass that I think needs to be read. It's at the Schiller Institute. And this is all important right now because the Palantir software is already having a major role. They've already supplied military, secret services, police, border police, others with their software for the use in conducting war and logistics and administration and analysis, and using algorithms to analyze private data and whatnot, including your facial scans. This has already reached a new, complete dictatorship dimension. And interesting in this context is that Lavrov said, he said, we need a Eurasian security architecture that will include the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Eurasian Economic Union, because NATO, the EU, the OSCE have no prospects and are becoming a thing of the past. This is what the foreign minister of Russia is saying about the rest of the planet. Well, it's definitely true. So I think if you look at the picture in totality, we're in the complete transformation from one system which has collapsed or is in the process of collapsing into a new system which has not yet completely consolidated. Therefore, it's a period of extreme danger, but also of extreme possibilities, because people are receptive to alternative ideas to this unipolar world. So at the same time, I'm very concerned as we're marching into the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. It's, you know, some of the people I talked to this weekend in Phoenix, they don't watch the news anymore. They used to watch it, but they don't watch it anymore. Ask them why. It's just crime and gore. Can't take it anymore. Did you see what the dominating news item was in Western media this last weekend? This kidnapping. I mean, I couldn't turn the TV on without hearing something more about kidnapping and the family saying, we'll pay, just give us our mother back. How many times do you have to report that? So this is a time for a real counter movement in this country. In the United States, the fact that you have the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, not the 250th anniversary of the birth of the nation, but of the American Revolution, which some people will say is the birth of the country. It's a perfect way to say we have to get back to the ideas of this republic, which was, after all, to a great degree organized against against the British Empire. It was never organized to have a special relationship with London. And the War of Independence was the first anti-colonial war in history. And what was the image of man against which it was being fought? It was Locke, it was Hobbes, and the Leviathan. Before it was Joseph de Maistre. I mean, if you think about the letter to the Prussian prince by Joseph de Maistre, in which he describes exactly the mindset of this current Epstein crowd, that they belong to some group of untouchables, while the rest of us are of the people are beasts who can be sacrificed for this or that. This is what has to be stopped. It has to be ended. If we forcefully tell the people we are going to create an international renaissance in the United States because of the American Revolution anniversary, that would resonate throughout the rest of the world. Well, how do you handle that? I mean, everybody somehow is confronted with this phenomenon that Trump has the presidency and he's going to be there for a while. And he's done what he's done. People don't want to rock the boat. Even the Democrats don't want to rock the boat, especially if they're in high positions. But you tell them then that this concept, that the whole idea of celebrating this 250th anniversary of the revolution is to understand what that revolution was about. Getting rid of colonialism. I think people are so thirsty to hear a perspective of lifting mankind back to the highest level of beauty and freedom. And all the things I've been trying to promote on my radio show for a long time. One of the people I talked to this weekend said, Jack, I've been following you for a long time. I've been listening to your radio show for a long time. You bring up things I have a hard time understanding. You bring up things I have a hard time supporting. But I know there's a spirit in you. Well, yeah, there is. And I hope to bring it out and establish it even more between now and July 4th. I'm really excited for the future. I'm excited for the future of this country. I'm excited for the possibilities that to me give a great hope. Now, do you wonder why Americans have tolerated Epstein economics and Epstein government for so long? Why is this finally coming to a head? The numbers I saw yesterday were 128 million Americans watched the Super Bowl, and about 57%, right now, 57% of Americans engage in gambling, which is estimated to be about a $209 billion per year industry in America. On top of that, 60% of Americans are regular users at least once a month of internet pornography, which is a $100 billion per year industry. 61.5 Americans, which is 23.5% of adults, used marijuana in 2024, with a total street value of Dope Incorporated's drug internationally estimated at $1 trillion. In all these areas, gambling, porn, and drugs, the percentages are appreciably higher in the younger cohorts than among the older generations. That kind of tells you something, doesn't it? I watched the first half of the game falling asleep a couple times. And then I watched the first few minutes of the halftime and turned it off. Some patients I talked to yesterday said they turned over to Turning Point USA's halftime program. I don't even think I was aware that existed, or if I'd forgotten it or something, so I didn't do that. I just turned it off. I had never seen, I felt personally affronted. Oh, geez. I don't want to step on any toes, but my goodness, it was the most boring Super Bowl game I've ever seen and the most ridiculous halftime show I have ever seen. The parts of it that I saw. Well, you didn't see the whole thing. No, thank goodness I didn't. Now, I was watching it on YouTube TV so that I could go back and look at it, watch the rest of the game, skipping the commercials. And that poor Shea fellow, the quarterback for New England, he just wasn't going to let go of the ball. He just wouldn't throw the ball. He just kept thinking if he had been able to throw the ball 2 or 3 seconds earlier, it had been a different game. He just didn't do it. All right, just as interesting, that of course is beginning today. Members of Congress may review the redacted Justice Department files on convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, based upon an agreement between the lawmakers and the Department of Justice. Now, did you hear what I just said? They may. Members of Congress may review the redacted Justice Department files. Can you think of anything more outrageously stupid than that? Would you like to review the redacted views of the Jeffrey Epstein files? Do you know what redacted means? They're erased. They're blacked over. A black magic marker, just blacking line after line, name after name. What are you going to see? And no wonder another 3.5 million pages haven't been published yet. Probably never will be. A letter that details this agreement between the lawmakers and the Department of Justice was the result of months of wrangling over what is considered excessive blacking out of the documents. They argued about what is a little bit of blacking out and what's a lot of blacking out. Why is anything being blacked out? Oh, national security. National security. We can't find the 9 out of 10 members of Congress. This is me. 9 out of 10 members of Congress, 9 out of 10 federal judges, 9 out of 10 state governors, 9 out of blah, 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 are all listed in those files. We can't have that. You know what would happen to this country if we caught all these people with their pants down? So we're going to black out some of it. Okay, how much are you going to black out? Well, now we think we ought to black out what we think needs to be blacked out. Oh, no, we can't allow that. You'll black out the whole thing. Oh, don't say that. What is considered excessive blacking out? Now the lawmakers are allowed to view the unredacted versions of the Department of Justice, but under strained conditions. No staff members, no electronic copies, and no prior notice of at least 24 hours to access the documents. Now just think about that. Holy smoke. You don't. Anyway, one of my heroes, and yours as well, I know, Representative Thomas Massie from Kentucky, told CNN yesterday morning that the fight is simply going to escalate. He said that if the Department of Justice continues to withhold the identities of Epstein's alleged clients, he would make them public by getting the names of the victims. And if the victims want to give them to me, I've expressed a willingness to do that. He says, this is my nuclear option. Representative Massey, I hope your life insurance is paid up. Massey's targeting the material on alleged abusers and their enablers, and it's expected that today's access by lawmakers is a prelude for upcoming congressional hearings, not only on the documents, but also in the Department of Justice handling of the release. So who does the Department of Justice work for? Not Pam Bondi. Who does Pam Bondi work for? At the pleasure of the president, because it's a branch of the executive branch of government. And the Department of Justice is saying, you know, we really shouldn't make this stuff public, even though we said we would in campaign promises. Now that we've looked at it, it is so disgusting and unbelievably macabre and bizarre and satanic by the leaders of this country and other Western nations that we dare not publish this stuff. Let's just hope the American public and the Western public at large do what they're very good at doing, forgetting. And in a few weeks ahead, we will make sure that the press doesn't say anything about it, that it's kept under wraps, and that we don't have to worry anything about it. Now, just a few minutes left. I want to mention this federal statement this was in the Daily Mail. This federal statement about announcing Jeffrey Epstein's death has surfaced in a newly released Justice Department file, but it carries a date that appears to precede the moment that he was found dead. Yeah, inside his New York prison cell. The document issued by the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York and dated Friday, August 9th, 2019, says Epstein has already been found unresponsive and pronounced dead. That was published a day before the morning when he was allegedly found dead. The prison records and the official accounts show Epstein was not discovered unresponsive until the morning of August 10th, when a corrections officer delivering breakfast found him in his cell, allegedly dead. So in the statement, then Manhattan U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Berman said, quote, earlier this morning, the Manhattan Correctional Center confirmed that Jeffrey Epstein, who faced charges brought by this office of engaging in the sex trafficking of minors, has been found unresponsive in his cell and pronounced dead shortly thereafter. Today's events are disturbing, and we're deeply aware of their potential to present yet another hurdle to giving Epstein's many victims to their day in court. To those brave young women who have already come forward and to the many others who have yet to do so, let me reiterate that we remain committed to standing for you in our investigation of the conduct charged in the indictment. You see how all that took away? All the focus there is on the young women who need to come forward and swear to the indictment that they left the death behind and moved right in. That's so typical. So this article says Epstein, 66, had been held at the Manhattan jail since his arrest July 6, 2019, after federal prosecutors charged him with sex trafficking minors and conspiracy. He pleaded not guilty, was awaiting trial when he died in custody just over a month later. Medical personnel attempted to revive him. All this could have been on cameras, but he was pronounced dead soon afterward. The New York medical examiner ruled his death a suicide by hanging. It just so happens these cells are hang-proof. They still haven't explained that one yet. Now, prison records show that the guards assigned to monitor Epstein did not conduct required checks during the overnight hours before his body was discovered. Scheduled rounds at 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. were missed. Cameras positioned outside Epstein's cell were not functioning properly that night. Investigators later confirmed that at least 2 surveillance cameras had malfunctioned, leaving critical gaps in the visual monitoring of the area. Jeez. Even though this happened years ago, the stink of the conspiracy is still there. Because of those failures, officials were unable to establish a definitive timeline of Epstein's final moments. So to this day, no precise official time of death has been determined. Well, the medical examiner can give you a good idea. So this newly released Department of Justice files have additional details that investigators reviewed in the aftermath of Epstein's death, including surveillance observations from inside the facility. So according to the records, investigators from the FBI and Justice Department's official Office of Inspector General identified footage showing what appeared to be an unidentified figure moving toward the floor where Epstein was housed. The footage reportedly captured an orange-colored shape ascending a staircase in the vicinity of Epstein's housing unit during the overnight hours. An orange-colored shape. Shape of what? An elephant? A kangaroo? The surveillance system's limitations and malfunctions prevented investigators from reconstructing a complete visual record of activity in the unit. A shadowy orange object could be seen moving up the stairs to Epstein's cell block at New York prison around 10:40 p.m. the night before he was found dead. So it was an orange-shaped gun. An orange shape. Did it say orange-colored shape or just an orange object? A shadowy orange object. Well, I suppose orange is prison color, prison uniform. A shadowy... What was wrong with the camera that it could only record a shadow? Well, it doesn't matter. His arrest in July of 2019 followed years of scrutiny over a controversial plea agreement he reached in Florida 11 years earlier, which allowed him to avoid federal prosecution at the time. His death ended the criminal case against him, but it has not ended the federal investigations into co-conspirators, and therefore a committee in our elected Congress today is going to be looking at the unredacted stuff, deciding what to redact, because their name might be in there, or somebody else of some particular consequence. All right, it's Tuesday. Lowell's coming up here in a few minutes. I'm going to stop my recording for what it would be worth. And then Lowell, I'm going to go and put what was on there back on. And sir, you can take it from there. Have a good show, Lowell, and thank you, K-Talk audience, for listening. I'll be back tomorrow with a health program. Oh, the half-off thing's still going. We just still people calling in. Please don't stop it. Please don't stop it. Well, we haven't. The half-off special for brand new patients is still ongoing. 801-523-1890. The schedule is packed, but we'll find a way to get you in there if that's what you would like for me to take care of you. Otherwise, I will see you all tomorrow.
Instead, they focused on deterrence as the primary role.
And for those on the stream, thank you once again for being a part of the listening audience. And I will give you a show worth listening to tomorrow. Thank you very much for being a